Good morning, good morning, good morning. Please take your seats. We're about to begin the program. Please take your seats. Good morning. Good morning. Please take your seats. What is... Good morning, good morning. My name is Kathy Ned. Good morning. If you will please take your seats, we're about to begin. Good morning, please take your seats. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Kathy Ned. I am the Associate Publisher and Chief Operating Officer of the Michigan Chronicle. We are so glad to have you out this morning. This is Season 12, Forum 2 of the Michigan Chronicle's Pancakes and Politics Speakers Forum. This morning we have 5 leaders from the foundation community, so the conversation is sure to be very informative and lively. Also this morning as our host, we have Vicki Thomas, who's City Beat reporter from WWJ News Radio 950. She is also the Region 2 Director of the National Association of Black Journalists and a former president of the Detroit chapter of NABJ. And Mr. Dennis Archer Jr., who's the CEO of Ignition Media Group and the founding partner of Archer Corporate Services. At this time, I'd like to bring to the podium Mr. Dennis Archer.
Thank you and good morning. By a show of hands, how many people were here at the last Pancakes and Politics? All right, that's good because you've heard the stories, because before I came up here, Hiram said no stories about me this time. And so this morning, it is simply my pleasure to bring up a very dynamic CEO and leader of a national media company and a dear friend, Mr. Hiram Jackson.
All right, good morning. We're going to get right into this panel. It's one of our big panels, but it's I've been working on this panel for 3 years. Wanted to do something that really highlighted the impact that the foundation community has on the Detroit community. The dollars that come into the greater Detroit area are in the billions, with a B. Hello, good morning. Anybody out there? So, you know, this is going to be a great discussion. Before I get into that, though, I want to make note that you have a book on your table. Take it with you. It's a great book. Dr. William Picard, one of our board members, wrote this book, The 7 Proven Principles of Entrepreneurship. It highlights a lot of activities that he's had in his life, and it's amazing. It's not your typical biography. It's real nitty-gritty stuff that he's been through in his entrepreneurship, and even talks about his uncle, the numbers man. So you'll enjoy reading that. Last month, we did incredibly well on social media. Amazing. And for those of you who don't know, this is being streamed live on Facebook. So if you're not supposed to be here this morning, it's too late. All right? You are live on Facebook. So the hashtags are going to be on the screen: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Please participate in the conversation. Let the world know what's going on in Detroit. Detroit is alive and well, and we want them to know, you know, how committed our foundation community is to rebuilding our city. I want to bring up right now Rick DeVore, president of the Michigan market for PNC Bank. As you guys know, PNC has just been a soldier for Pancakes and Politics, along with all of our partners in this. And I do call them partners, and I mean that they're partners, because they've invested so much in Pancakes and Politics to make it happen. I got my list here because I don't want to miss anybody, because I missed Blue Cross Blue Shield last month, and I heard about it. All right. But PNC Bank, Henry Ford Health System, Comcast, Bank of America, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Chase, FCA, Quicken Loans, St. John's Providence Health System, and UHY Advisors. You know, all of you have been tremendous. HAP. I don't want to miss HAP. HAP is great. HAP is great. But all of you guys have been tremendous. Pancakes and Politics is always packed, always great content, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Good morning. Hopefully everybody made it through the storms and so forth. You know, every time that I land at Metro Airport, I'm reminded what a blessing it is to have an airport like that. And if you don't have a reference, just try to go to my headquarters city, Pittsburgh, with its 75 flights a day and its inability to get somewhere. I'm using that metaphor to talk about the Foundation Committee. If you think of the group up here and our other great foundations, don't take this for granted. We have outstanding philanthropic community that do a lot of good. And I don't mean just the grand bargain, but just it goes on and on. So I really think we're blessed in this room to have these kind of leaders helping us out in this great city. PNC Bank, as you know, has a commitment to education and early childhood education. We partner with every one of these groups, and since this is on social media, I want to make a comment about something we're doing right now, and I'm asking to enroll you to help us. We are partnering with a group called DonorsChoose.org, and we are willing to match fund every teacher at a Head Start school and pre-K and every pre-K in this region, dollar for dollar, up to $5 million on things that they need in their classroom. Now, I want to caution you, this $5 million is under every state that we do business, so I am very selfish, and I want Detroit and Southeast Michigan to get as much of this as we can. So if you're out on social media, if you know a pre-K teacher in Head Start in the city of Detroit, it can be Madison Heights, Clawson, wherever, get them to put something in the queue, and we will match it dollar for dollar. This investment is one that we partner with the people up here, whether it's the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children. A number of us in this room are still moving forward. If it's Hope Starts Here, if it's Say and Play with Words, these are important. We can't do these things without our community. So on behalf of all the PNC employees in this region, thanks for coming, and I hope and I know you'll enjoy this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I'd also like to say that Edgar Van, Bishop, you're here, is our guest tweeter this morning. So if you like to follow him, what's your handle on Twitter? And what's the hashtag? Pancakes in Politics 2017. So Hiram mentioned that we had a phenomenal social media presence at the last breakfast. Let's try to beat it this breakfast. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning, a dynamic and very experienced and giving group. First, Mr. David Egner, President and CEO of the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. Miriam Nolan, President of the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan. Tanya Allen, President and CEO of the Skillman Foundation. Rip Rapson, President and CEO of the Kresge Foundation. And Malenka Clark, President and CEO, Hudson Weber Foundation. Please have a seat. Couple notes this evening. Hiram has Malenka doing double time. She'll be receiving the Michigan Chronicle Woman of Excellence Award, so congratulations. And before I have each of the panelists give a brief description about the mission of their organization, a special shout out to Miriam, because in 2001, I think it was, our family started a foundation. And it's now managed by the Community Foundation of Southeastern Michigan, and we've given over $1 million in scholarships to African-American students from the city of Detroit that either go to Wayne State or Western Michigan University. So thank you, Miriam. So we'll go in inverse order. Malenka, welcome to Detroit. It's probably, we're beyond saying that now. You've been here for a little bit. But why don't we start with you and talk a little bit about the mission of your organization?
Sure. So the Hudson Weber Foundation's mission is to improve the quality of life in Detroit. It is one of the things that made me excited about coming up, and many things about excited to come to the city and work with the foundation. But it was really its varied programmatic areas. So we support work in the area of physical revitalization, arts and culture, economic development, and safe communities, which is a public safety portfolio. Over the years, we've invested over $200 million in the city of Detroit. And I can, what's fun to be up here, I can sit and take credit for the wonderful work of my predecessor, David Egner, who, has along with the board, just made significant investments in the city, and I think have been such an important part of bringing the city forward.
Thank you. Rip?
Well, first, let me just echo what a huge pleasure it is to have Malanka in the mix. She is, we thought we had hit the pinnacle with Dave, and maybe we have, but I think Malanka has set a very different kind of bar, and to have both Dave and Malanka in the mix is just a huge pleasure. We'll talk about Tanya later. The Kresge Foundation was founded here in Detroit in 1924. So, the old Kresge 5 and dime grew into Kmart, and that fortune ultimately was converted into the trust that has become the Kresge Foundation. We work all across the country. About 20 or 25% of our dollars flow into Detroit, and we basically are focused on trying to create sort of the strong building blocks that low-income people need in order to get into the economic mainstream in urban America. So we do work all across the country, but obviously our deepest roots are here in Detroit. We work across a variety of domains, from light rail to the riverfront to neighborhood re-granting programs to workforce training. So we try to build as much as we can across the full range of supports that folks in Detroit need in order to be successful.
Tanya?
Great. Well, it's good to see everybody. I'm going to work to butter you up. I want to be your favorite panelist, so I'm going to tell you, y'all look really good. I mean, this is the best looking audience I've ever seen. I'm actually picking with Rip, but I would say this. The Maasai tribe, when they greet each other, they say, "How are the children?" And that greeting is really about asking, is life good enough that we treat our youngest children well? And I think, unfortunately, in Detroit, if we were to ask ourselves, how are the children, we would say that we are not well. The children are not well, and as a result of that, the city isn't well. And I think that the Skillman Foundation's intentions are really to make sure that one day we'll be able to say the children are well. So we're about kids. Thank you.
I don't know, y'all. That was pretty good. You guys better step up.
So the foundation is really fundamentally about kids, and it's about Detroit. And we want to make sure that Detroit children have all of the opportunities that allow them to be able to have both wings and roots in the city.
Thank you very much. Marion?
Well, thank you. I'm really very pleased to be here with my friends and colleagues, and I do want to recognize that there are a number of other foundation colleagues in the audience, including a number of trustees of various foundations, and some of them mine, so just wanted to acknowledge them. We are in our 32nd or 33rd year, so we're a bit of a young foundation, and in terms of community foundations, one of the younger in the country, but as a sort of a comment on the generosity of this region, we're now the 23rd largest community foundation in the country, thanks to the generosity of all of you. We were founded by a number of people, including Joe Hudson, and our purpose is to build permanent capital that can benefit this region, so we are regional. But of the $73 million we gave away last year, the majority is in the city of Detroit. To the institutions here, they may serve the region. But we are about building for all of these great communities the capital that's needed to do the best they can for everyone who lives and works here. So again, pleased to be here.
So it is great to be here with colleagues, and since this foundation is only 2 years old, I'll have very little to say today. Mr. Wilson owned the Buffalo Bills, for those of you that didn't know, but he lived in Grosse Pointe and was a lifelong Detroiter, and moved here when he was 3 years old and died when he was in his mid-90s. And he had left the proceeds from the Bills and all the other companies in a trust that had benefited the foundation. So we have an interesting dilemma. It's a $1.2 billion foundation with a 20-year spend-down mandate, or if you're on staff, a 17-year 8-month and 10-day spend down mandate. He's appointed 4 life trustees and said, you all know me, times change. I'm not going to tell you what to spend it on because it may be a different need in a few months. So you figure it out, just spend it in 20 years. And they chose 2 markets, Southeast Michigan and Western New York, so that's our concentration. And our focus, children and youth, working class families and young adults, caregivers, and economic development, nonprofit productivity, and access and design.
Thank you very much. So, Mary, you mentioned the word everyone in your comments, to live and work. And I'm not sure how many of you were able to take a look at Keith Owen's article that he wrote in the Chronicle in advance of today's breakfast. But let me read you a paragraph. The issue of who will be allowed to share control of the city's future direction and development will most likely be the elephant in the room. And are the neighborhoods finally getting the attention that has been poured all over downtown? And how much of a part will black people play in the reimagining and redevelopment of this majority black city? And so the elephant in the room, which I'm bringing into the discussion now, is that there's a lot of conversation as it relates to new investment, new people moving downtown, people from out of state, even out of the country coming in, and a lot of lifelong Detroiters feel like they've been left out. What role do you believe, and this is for any of you, that the foundation community needs to play in balancing that out? Tanya, we'll start with you.
Yeah, right.
In law school, that was a Socratic method. Nobody raises their hand, you pick on somebody.
So I think that it is the foundation. It is a foundation responsibility to make sure that this city's recovery is an equitable recovery. And I also would say that I think that it's also our responsibility to make sure that our recovery isn't like a recovery in Boston or San Francisco or New York, where basically you see what could possibly happen, which is the core of these cities are very strong, and they also become divided by class and race. And then you see in a lot of those places that basically people who tend to be brown or black and low income are pushed to the skirts of the city, to the outskirts of the city, or even into the suburbs, which is this kind of notion of the suburbanization of poverty. I believe that we know what the game plan is. We know what recovery looks like, and we know what it looks like when it's good economically, and we also know what it looks like when it's bad socially. And so I think we need to name that, talk about it, figure out how we're making sure that there are diverse voices in the room, at the table, and making sure that those diverse voices are not sitting at the table with a folding chair, right? It ought to be permanent issues, permanent chairs at those tables, and that they also need to be capable of setting the agenda. The agenda, if somebody else is setting the agenda and so you get to weigh in on their agenda, how much real voice do you have in the room? And I think that it's our responsibility. And so the foundation has been committed, the Skillman Foundation, because there are lots of foundations here, have been committed to neighborhoods for a very long time. We've also been committed to making sure that the voices of people are included in our decision making and in our viewpoints. But more importantly, we've been committed to making sure that young people and their voices are included in this recovery. So when you ask young people about, we had this very long debate, and I'll stop talking, but this debate where everyone in the city was talking about 2 Detroits. What does this new Detroit look like? And I asked the young people, what do you think about this new Detroit? And they had no idea what we were talking about. That's number one. Many of them are not going downtown. They don't have access to downtown, and downtown isn't coming to them. The second thing that they would say is, we are the new Detroit. They thought when I raised that question, they thought I was asking them a question about themselves. And what they started to talk about was how they felt like the opportunities were closing in on them, that there were no opportunities for them to do the things that they enjoyed. or to do the things that they felt like would give them access to a brighter future. And I think that we just need to take some time to redefine what a new Detroit is, because I think we got the wrong definition.
Anyone else? Malenka?
Yeah, I think that, the narrative around the two Detroits is an important one. It's central to our story here. And I think that something to keep in mind is that, growth in the downtown core is necessary, but not, it's an essential, but not the entire need to kind of advance growth, right? So we have to have a downtown core that, folks from across the city feel like they own. And I was in a conversation with someone and asking them, how do you feel about kind of what's happening? And he said, and he didn't live downtown, said, we deserve this, right? And I was like, that is like the beloved community, where folks from the outer port understand that that place is for them. But then on top of that, and philanthropy and all stakeholders that are in this space have to be mindful of, okay, we've positioned ourselves around growth and economic development, but what about the people part? What about the investments in people? How do we connect people in a really explicit way to what's happening in the city? And that's whether it's investments in education, workforce training, the access points that are really what makes, equitable access happen. And I think for many foundations, so many of us are going through a strategic review process right now, we certainly are, to really try and get that right, and really try to help support what's happening here so that we can have shared prosperity. It's critical. It's absolutely critical.
Thank you very much.
Wouldn't it be a shame if we have spent so much time and energy over the last number of years trying to build up the core, doing rail projects and arena projects and downtown redevelopment projects, if we had learned nothing about that might in fact be extended into the neighborhoods? If we actually could think about how do our anchoring institutions like the medical center, like Henry Ford, like Wayne State, have a counterpart in the neighborhoods? Can you go up into the Live 6 neighborhood and think about St. John's? Can you think about Marygrove and UD Mercy and how they react to their community and respond to their community? How do you think about the kind of the economic flywheels that we've set in motion along the corridor? There's got to be a counterpart on the corridors of our neighborhoods. How do you think about residential stability that's beginning to sort of characterize our Midtown area, and how does that work in a Fitzgerald neighborhood or a Brightmoor neighborhood? So one of the challenges I think philanthropy has is to make sure that it doesn't do a sort of a one-and-done kind of activity. Try to understand where we've been successful, where we haven't been successful, and sort of embrace the entire community in the exercise of trying to figure out what that means. Kresge, for example, tomorrow is going to announce $3 or $4 million of grants in the neighborhoods, very small scale, to try to get the kind of energy and sense of optimism going that we need in order to convince the entire community, whether it's City Hall, whether it's our corporate community, whether it's our investor community, that there are things that we can do in the neighborhoods that really aren't so different from what we've done downtown, except to both of the points. This is where the residential capacity, the residential ability to sort of problem set and problem solve has to really take root. And so I think from our perspective, one of the things we're going to be focusing on a lot is how do neighborhoods and the residents of those neighborhoods have the tools they need in order to sort of chart their own destiny. Because I think we've done a pretty good job of that in Midtown and downtown, but I think it's now just the work of the city is the work of neighborhoods. There's just no question about it.
Thank you. If no other comments,
I'll
go ahead,
Dennis.
Sure.
I'll say something.
Yeah, this is too important not
All
to
right.
say something about. The inherent in the question are two things. One, the history of disinvestment, which is long and sordid, and we all know those stories. The other is that the solution is one side or the other. It's not an either-or issue. It's a both-and. We've got to build a strong core and a market-driven economy and have new companies forming. But if we do that without bridging to the neighborhoods in a new way and empowering in a new way, we've made a tremendous error. Not only have we left people behind, but we've essentially mortgaged our future because Detroit can't be successful in that fashion. So a couple of things have happened that I think it's important to step back and look at. One is the New Economy Initiative work. Immediately, Henry Ford Health System, Detroit Medical Center, Wayne State started looking at procurement. The companies joined in. Detroit Economic Growth Corporation started a program called D2D. How do we get local-owned, minority-owned companies engaged in procurement with the large corporations and big employers? And I haven't kept track of the numbers, but it was tens of millions of dollars of new contracts let within a couple years by empowering in a different way. The entrepreneurial work at NEI went from high growth to grassroots into neighborhoods in a way to say businesses that have been here matter. The bin-ups matter as much as the startups. And we've got to keep, as philanthropy, pushing this issue of inclusion back into the neighborhoods while the market starts to thrive. But if we don't do both, Detroit can't be great.
Thank you. Miriam?
Yeah, one of the really key assets of what you have in the foundations is that we have the freedom to decide what we want to do. And yes, there's accountability there. You've got to keep us honest. But the choices we make are important. The choices we make are important. And I think if you look at all of us, we struggle with making sure that we're using the money with the highest return. Are we getting the leverage? Are we bringing people together? Dave talked about the fact that NEI focuses now in neighborhoods. And we know because of the requirement of inclusion in those activities, there are 3 times more minority business startups in Detroit than anywhere else in the country. So it can work. So I would just say to all of you that I hope you will keep an eye on us and help us do the best we can, because in my time in Detroit, if we all put our energy behind it, it happens. So we could talk about these issues. You know, I'm going to sooner or later turn back to Tanya and say, it is about the kids. It is about our future. Mm-hmm. It's about giving our kids a fair shot in the education system and everything else we provide to them. So we look at very, very long-term investments. We're here forever. If we take an issue on, PNC stepped up on early childhood. So did Fisher and others. So, it's where we focus and how we use our dollars.
Thank you very much. Great comments. Vicki, do we have something from the floor?
All right. Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for all that you do in the community. It is a lot. I'm going to start with the new kid on the block. I'm really intrigued by that $1.2 billion over 20 years. So I know you've already started funding initiatives and programs. So tell us what you're looking for and talk about some of those programs that have already been funded.
So we seemingly are farther along than we are. Year one, 4 very special people who knew Mr. Wilson, who were appointed life trustees, moved $60 million in both markets to legacy gifts. So things that Mr. Wilson, they thought would have wanted to see done, a lot of capital gifts. Community foundations in both markets became very important to setting up field of interest funds. It's essentially our small grants program. So we're in our second year of partnership with the community foundations in moving funds in some areas where we wanted to see grants of $25,000 to $50,000. I just looked over a big group of recommendations this week. So that partnership was set up. And my team has been establishing priorities and strategies for the last year. So to say that we've got a strategy that can be fully articulated would be ahead of the game. I have to remind myself, a year ago we were writing checks by hand. I had 3 staff members I inherited from the Buffalo Bills who hadn't heard the word philanthropy. But we've started to make progress. And in this market in particular, we're looking at partnership in the early childhood space. We've been at the table with Hope Starts Here. We've been talking with our friends on this podium that have been involved with that, and we're starting to make some grants in the area of green infrastructure. This storm sewer runoff thing is concerning to us, both from a standpoint of environment, but also the tax burden it's going to put in the market. So we've got a couple pilot projects in that space that have just started to take off.
Can you talk about why caregivers, and this coming from someone who was a caregiver to my mom and my stepdad, and why that particular focus?
It's the only thing Mr. Wilson came back to the 4 life trustees on. He wrote them a letter. He had been ill. And he said, I'm watching the people who are giving care suffer. They don't have the resources to do their job. I'm watching others who can't get access to caregivers, and it's family who's filling in. If the foundation could do something with paid and unpaid caregivers, I'd be very proud of that. So we're one of the only foundations in the country looking at that issue, and we're very excited about what we think can pull in that space. The challenge is there's no data. So the data around caregivers is really speculative data grabbed from organizations that support some of the work. We have a lot of work to do there just to understand the issue.
All right, and we have a question from the audience. Rochelle Riley.
Good morning,
Thank
Rochelle.
you very much. Good morning. I am looking at the Brain Trust of one of the best foundational and philanthropic communities I've been in. I've only lived in 6 cities, so that's what I'm comparing it to. And we're talking billions of dollars, so I have to ask 2 questions. With that amount of money and that amount of philanthropic acumen, why in the world are the city's schools so bad? And have you, as a group, in those conversations that you're having, talked about coming together, all the foundations, to drop the mother of all philanthropic bombs on the city schools so that you can do a big fix instead of the continual fixes that everybody does in little ways? Thank you.
There's an easy one.
You know, before Tanya gives you the real answer, you know, Rochelle, at the risk of not maybe saying what I think you'd like me to say, I think if we knew that money was the solution, we would have done exactly that. When I look at every major city in America, these are some of the issues, the same issues they've struggled with. And there have been pools of enormous amounts of money in other places, and they just haven't cracked the code. It's not to say that you don't have to lean in with all of the resources you possibly can muster. And we're doing that at Kresge with a lot of partners in early childhood development. Tanya has been just tireless in the K-12 space. We have other folks who have focused on the post-K college experience. I think we have to figure out as a community what it is we want to do, and then we can assemble the resources behind it. But I think just throwing the resources at it, I'm not sure that gets you what you want. But I don't think any of us on this podium would blink if we knew exactly how we could deploy those resources in the most effective way to move the outcomes for young people forward. But I think you don't lead with the money. I think you lead with the ideas and the commitments and the reform that you need in order to get things done.
Now the real answer.
The real answer.
Well, I think as a community, I just think that we need to break ourselves out of the narrative that we can't fix our schools. And I just think as a community, for many years and for many generations, we've been fatigued. I mean, you know, we're a very generous community, and people have contributed in lots of ways. And when those things haven't worked, I think it's basically set up this mentality that that's too hard. We need to put our resources in places where we'll have the greatest impact. And I guess I would just say that our recovery is going to be harder because we have literally forgotten the multiple generations in our community. You know, I'm a big advocate for early childhood. I'm a big advocate for kids who are in kindergarten. I'm a big advocate for kids who are in the 5th grade. And I'm a big advocate for kids who are in the 12th grade. The reason I say that is because a lot of times we like to focus on one particular group. And we think that if we just work with young kids, that those young kids in 18 years are going to change the city, except they have parents that we forgot about. They have older brothers and sisters that we've forgotten about. And I think that it's time for us to make a generational declaration that that we are no longer as a community going to say this is too hard for us to do. I think that one of the most powerful things that we experienced in the city in the last few years was to make it through the bankruptcy, because we have a muscle memory that says we can do really hard shit. Say it again. And so what I would say to us is that we are mobilizing the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children, as Rick DeVore mentioned again. And the reason that we're doing it is because of just what Rip said. We have to name 2 or 3, 5 things that we're, as a community, going to get behind, make the investment in those things. Everybody get in alignment. I always say, do Beyonce. Get in alignment. Like, it is time for us to get in alignment, make the investments. And the investments are not just financial. The investments are leadership. That's going to be the most crucial. I agree with Rip on that point. That's the most important contribution we can make, is leadership and making sure that we're contributing and also holding people accountable.
Well, I'll just say one thing about that. I agree totally. I always agree with Tanya. If you look back at the Grand Bargain, it really wasn't about the money. It was about leadership, but it wasn't just leadership in the city of Detroit. I think the education and the issue is going to take leadership across the state, understanding that there are pieces that have to be put together to enable success once the hard effort is done here and the school board performs. So I think it's a joint leadership that's going to take corporate muscle as well as foundation muscle and public sector muscle.
But I also want to just say, we have shown that we have muscle. I mean, I just want to remind everyone, when the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children got together, people said when we asked for the debt to be removed, it would never happen. It would never happen. We had a recalcitrant legislature that did not want to help. And we still walked out of there with nearly $700 million. So if we all did it together, there could be big significant shifts at the state level, because everybody has the same aspirations, even if we think there's a different approach to get it, regardless of your political party. But we have to be on one accord. And the cities that have moved the needle in education on anything, it has been, we are on one accord. Let's get some small wins, let's show momentum, and then let's go after some of the harder problems. In Detroit, we love to go after the hardest problems with the least amount of resources. And we got to figure out how to fix that. Like, that's a strategy problem, and we got to work on it.
Thank you. Vicki?
Good morning, everyone. Milan Stavanovich with the Detroit Chinese Business Association. Mr. Rapson, a few years ago you did a deal with Shinola. Is there any other projects, or is that a new model that could be developing of philanthropy in the private sector, and any words or comments on that?
I think what the reference is that a number of years ago, Shinola was actually looking for some additional capital. They came to Dan Gilbert and they came to Kresge, and we chose to invest. So we're part owners of Shinola. It's a good thing and a bad thing. I think that the bigger question is the extent to which philanthropy can increasingly be comfortable sort of working with private sector markets to get things done. And I think actually the good news is in Detroit, we, again, have good muscle memory on that. It's whether it's working with PNC Bank on early childhood development, or working with Roger Penske on a rail project, or working with a local set of businesses in the revitalization of a community. I think increasingly it is not so clear that it is just philanthropic capital, or it is just private capital, or it's just public sector capital that solves these problems. And I think that in some ways is sort of Tanya's point about the education challenge, is that we've got to figure out ways to unlock, I guess this is to Rochelle's point, you've got to figure out ways to unlock orders of magnitude of capital that will actually move the needle on some of these big issues. And I think the good news is that philanthropy is actually social venture capital. It actually can try things, it can start things in motion, it can open up markets in ways that we didn't expect them to be opened up. And so I think, I don't know that we have anything in particular in mind, but we also, in effect, partnered with Whole Foods to bring Whole Foods into downtown. And I think there are just lots and lots of examples of how we can sort of take some of that muscle memory into our neighborhoods and begin trying to convince the private markets that have been reluctant to move into neighborhoods that there are actually lots and lots of things to invest in, whether it's open space or blue-green infrastructure or schools or small businesses. We haven't even begun to sort of tap the potential of our market system to be helpful to our neighborhood residents.
That's a very interesting question. One of your peers, Darren Walker, yesterday was on CNBC in the morning, and he was talking about just this fact,
right.
The fact that they are looking at, they have their principal body, their corpus that sits and gains money, and I think they have to give away 5% of that a year is
right.
their particular goal. But he's now saying that their traditional investment capital, that which may be in bonds or very conservatively invested in their portfolio, they're now looking to take those investment dollars and principally invest in mission-driven transactions, exactly what you're talking about. Do you see that as a trend that's going to...
It is absolutely a trend. Darren and I and a bunch of other people are going to get together next week and talk about how his model, Kresge's model, a number of others, folks in this space, can actually begin moving into broader philanthropy. Let me just say, though, that what the Ford Foundation did was actually carve out a piece of their endowment to make market rate investments. They're a $12 billion foundation, if you can imagine. They took $1 billion of that and said, we will invest it differently for social good. I think the next step is actually to go beyond what Darren has done and to say the full $12 billion, or in our case, the full $4 billion, has to figure out how to be socially responsible and socially impactful. That's a big stretch. I mean, you get investment houses in all of our shops saying, well, our job is not to invest in social good. Our job is to create as much capital as we can so that you can invest in social good. And I think that's a false dichotomy. There's no reason in the world that the entire Kresge endowment shouldn't be leaning into some of the most difficult issues of our community. It doesn't have to be a grant program. It doesn't have to be a social investment program. But it sure ought not to be working at cross purposes with what we're trying to do. And ideally, it ought to really be advancing. And I think that's the import of what Darren is talking about.
Denny, if I could say one thing, is my mic on? Okay. I just want to acknowledge that there are two other foundations in our region who are not maybe as large as Ford and is not getting as much public recognition around this, but who have been leading in this way. Kellogg had been one of the first foundations, one of the first large national foundations to put aside resources and to make these capital investments. And then I also want to acknowledge Fisher Foundation, which is a smaller foundation, smaller regional foundation like the Skillman Foundation. Their board, their family, which is from this community and loves this community, have figured out ways to not only take the foundation corpus, but also to figure out ways that they can take their personal wealth to make investment in communities. And I think we should acknowledge them. They're not going to hit MSNBC, but they hit my radar. So I want to say
Thank you. Vicki?
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Philip Fisher, who started Mission Throttle, really ought to be recognized as one of the country's leaders on this subject. Look up Mission Throttle. It's very interesting.
Marvis Cofield.
Marvis Cofield, Kivalon Village. As we approach the 50th anniversary of the 1967 rebellion, you all who have done well, and I commend all of you, we need more money, but equally important in terms of how it is disseminated as it relates to the young folks, youth programs. You know, we're competing, faith-based, after-school programs, neighborhood organizations. Have we talked about how can we collaborate and put monies, because it's not one or the other in these neighborhoods, you know, as you've heard, idle time is the devil's workshop. Have you thought about collaborating internally with your resources and saying, you can do all three? Some folks say, this is a numbers game. Well, I need you at my church in order, because I have an after-school program, I need you in my school or in my neighborhood organization. How can people say, well, you can do all three, and you'll get credit, and everybody benefits, but ultimately the young person gets the best from the best. Thank you.
Anyone?
I'll go, because I feel like you're going to call me, Denny. I would say this, is that one, so what is happening as a part, just in general, I think we just have to recognize this and name it, that philanthropic organizations used to just fund and kind of like programmatic activities. Right now, because we're at such a crucial point in our city's recovery, we're funding things that I don't think many of us ever thought we would fund. I'm sure you didn't wake up and say, I'm going to fund a train going down Woodward Avenue, or that we were going to be funding the startup of businesses. So my point around this, or city pensions, my point simply is that these resources, even though we have a larger amount of these resources, they're being distributed in a very different way than they were a couple of generations ago. The second thing I would say is that we have been looking to the philanthropic community to add many of the extras, which aren't really extras, because youth programming is not extra. That's crucial to a city's operation. We've been looking to the philanthropic community to support those things, and I don't think that there are enough resources. I know there's not enough resources to do that. I think we can do better, and I think with Ralph Wilson here, the foundation here, that it's going to grow exponentially, I'm hoping. But what I think we're going to have to do as a community, if we really want to get the right resources, I think we got to go after getting a sustainable public financing mechanism to support youth in our city. We're one of the largest cities in the country that does not have it. We do not have a funding source that is coming from our community to support children. And we need to figure it out. So there are places like Philadelphia that did soda taxes. There are other places that have figured out how to put on a tax when you come to hotel or entertainment fees or different things like that. We need to mobilize. You guys know I was a community organizer, so I'm trying not to use my community organizing language and be a philanthropic leader. But we have to mobilize as a community and make that a priority, because I don't think that we're going to get to the level of support we need in our communities when we have 84% of our children in the city of Detroit live in concentrated poverty. We don't need small fixes, like Rochelle said. We need big fixes, and big fixes are going to require big resources and big dollars, and I think that we have to decide that we're going to make that kind of investment in this community.
Say one other thing about resources, and I see people here from the city and from the county. I think we have to pay attention to what happens in D.C. right now, and what flows may happen or not happen, whether it's cultural, whether it's health, whatever. Those dollars are very significant in the leverage that we all use to make things happen. And so, number one. Number two, and I don't lobby today, I think we're going to have to all come together and pay attention to what happens to the charitable deduction. If you look at, I don't know what's going to happen with the tax bill, but the latest I heard, as of even last night, is that the administration is saying that they may want to advocate a cap on charitable giving. This is the 100th anniversary of this country putting in place a charitable deduction. And it has made a difference in how we structured everything we do. If we, and estimates are anything from $17 to $34 billion of charitable dollars that might not flow. So we all sit up here. We all have to use that leverage. But sooner or later, I hope we all pay attention to the fact that this country was built on voluntarism and on giving, and that incentive doesn't cost that much. But I think we're going to have to make sure we don't lose it.
Malenka? And then
just to build on what everyone's saying, I mean, it is incredibly concerning to see what's happening in D.C., and I think part of sort of the role of philanthropy and others is to support the voices that can make the case for a shared destiny, and I think that that is certainly, as we think about what's happening locally in Detroit, and we think about what's happening nationally in this country, that is the missing piece. And certainly, as I'm sitting at Hudson Weber and thinking about how our dollars can have the most impact, because doing good is not always the same thing as having impact. It's really thinking about how to support the voices and leadership so that we can speak in ways where we can collectively understand our shared values, and they are shared values. But you know, to have to sort of make those voices heard. The other thing I just wanted to say, it's about, you know, the question was about youth and how we support our youth, and you mentioned the anniversary of 1967. The other piece of that, I think, is really to think about the criminal justice system. And so it's not just the inputs that help lift up our youth, but sort of putting our hand up to the inputs that push down our youth. And I think that, you know, our over-reliance on incarceration here in Michigan, 20% of the state budget goes to corrections. It's had particularly terrible effects on African communities of color. There's a whole national dialogue happening around policing that we need to keep going. And, you know, as the sort of the leadership that was in D.C., and that's where I come from, where I came before coming here, you know, there was, you had leadership on the national level talking about these issues and how to fix them, and we're not likely to see that anytime soon. So I do think at the local level we have to keep those conversations going, and I, you know, certainly want to help support and be part of that conversation.
Thank you. Vicki?
One of the things that I love about Pancakes in Politics is that it brings together such a diverse, just look around, audience, a diverse audience every time. I'm wondering, how diverse is your board? And if you had to give yourself a rating on the diversity on your board, what grade would you give yourself? Who wants to go first?
Well, I have a very interesting situation in that 4 life trustees were appointed and are there for life. And so that leaves 3 at-large trustees. So it's, I give us a C. We've got 1 African-American man of those 3. The other 2 are from Buffalo because that market is so important to us. So we've got to do better as we look forward and as the life trustees age and we term people over. But a good solid C right now would be my grade.
Okay. So I don't know if I can give it an exact grade. It's never good enough. Never good enough. I have 59 board members. And
wow, that's a lot of board members.
I won't trade my 7 for her 59, by the way. Even though they're great.
It's an amazing board. It's a great board. It somewhat represents the 7 counties. That's one of the issues. My failure is largely that we don't have enough women. Yes, not enough minority, but this is an interesting town, an interesting place, and trying to, I'll just leave it at that. I need to do more work.
You don't want to venture to give yourself a grade?
Oh, we're no better than C.
Well, let me help with Vicki's question. I think that the number is, for the boards represented here, 11% of your boards collectively are African American.
Yes.
So that's the number, if that helps you frame your discussion.
So our board is 9 members, 4 persons of color, and 4 women. Our staff is equally as diverse. Well over 50% of our staff are people of color from leadership at every single level. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I'm emphasizing this, so I would give us a B. And the reason I would give us a B is because that is representation. Mm. It's diversity, it's representation, it's inclusion. But what I am hoping is that I want our organization to fully, at every single level, understand why we need to have every kind of diversity, because it gives us a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. Not because we're trying to fill slots or check numbers. And I think we still have some way to go. And actually at our board meeting coming up, we're going to spend some time on Coates' book. I'm blanking on the name of it. Between the World and Me. So it'll be interesting.
Right.
It's hard to improve on that answer. Our board is a national board of 12 folks. 5 are people of color. We have a staff of about 140% of our folks are people of color. But I think to Tanya's point, trying to ensure that you sort of move beyond the numbers toward true lived experience. I think, and one of the things we're struggling with is we can have all of the empathy in the world, but it's not the same as lived experience. And so actually understanding that both our staff and our board have to come out of the work is increasingly important. But I think we're doing better. I'm hesitant to put myself in the same category as Skillman because it's such an exemplary institution, but I would give us a B.
Malenka.
So my board has 13 members, not including myself. We have 2 African Americans and 3 women. So certainly room for improvement. But I'm, we have 5 family members too, and that's the dynamic that, needs to be accounted for as we think about the demographics. But I was incredibly encouraged that, early conversations with the board when I was coming in was about this very topic and how we do better in this area. And certainly, I think my hiring and, I lifted our scores, the demographics of our board. But I think the board was, is being incredibly thoughtful about that. Really, I think, how do I put this? I think proud about the statement they have made by putting me in this position, and I think that they are going to continue to be thoughtful as we think about as spaces open up, how we kind of keep university.
So would that be a B or C, or what would you give yourself?
I would do the grade. In my first year, I got to give us, not a C, but I would have to put it there too. That's where we're at. Yeah.
All right.
Good morning. My name is Renee Pruitt, and I'm president of the Pruitt Group, which is a public relations company. And I was noting your comments about how you can't just continue to throw money at the problem, but we also need leadership. So what is going on in the Detroit area community now where you're seeing the kind of leadership in various activities that you want to support now and in the future? I guess I'm asking, what particularly are you looking for as you make your funding decisions?
Thank you. Can I both not answer and answer the question? I mean, the non-answer is something I've been wanting to put on the table, is that we've spent the entire morning without talking about the public sector for all practical purposes. I think it's really tempting to sort of think of philanthropy as sort of standing outside the mainstream of public decision making, and sort of, as Tanya suggested, sort of supplementing around the edges rather than kind of getting into the core. And I think we are at a point in this community's evolution where the blending of public, civic, private, and philanthropic leadership is the kind of sort of mix that's going to take for us, whether it's to crack an educational set of challenges or a community redevelopment set of challenges. And so from our perspective, the kind of leadership we're looking for is the kind of leadership that is comfortable moving among the sectors, trying to understand how you grab the business community when you need certain pieces of work from them, how you work with the public sector to make sure that we're aligned with the mayor's priorities, how you draw on community wisdom and community voice when you're trying to reinforce identity. I think it's not so simple as it used to be. And the mayor and I have both struggled and agreed on the idea that it is no longer sort of a command and control system in Detroit. The mayor cannot get done what he and his administration need to get done without the civic sector, without the private sector, and without the philanthropic sector. And I think he knows that, but I think that there are sort of old habits die hard, and I think there is occasionally a tendency to sort of hang on to control and hang on to problem-solving capacity, when in fact what we need to do is distribute that into the community and make sure that all of our community decisions are informed by a combination of the sector's wisdom, voice, and resources.
One more question.
One last question. Marlo.
This is a good wrap-up question. First of all, I love you all. So we've talked about problems. We've talked about issues. Good. But I know for a fact that these people and everybody else in here is doing great work. That's number one. We can't change what happened yesterday. We can change what we do tomorrow. And a wise man once told me not necessarily paying attention to what a puck is today, but where it's going. Tell me one thing that you are doing in your foundation that you're really, really excited about. That's number one. And two, give us some perspective on where you see some immediate opportunities for everyone else to do their part or model what others are doing in other parts of the world, not just the country.
So in June, late June, we've been working with the Community Foundation here and the two in Western New York, Rochester and Buffalo, on a youth sports and rec scan. Our concern was that regionally we did not really understand the facilities, the issues in coaching, the access issues. Organized sports has been declining rapidly, and we've not taken our kids and given them opportunities to interact with one another or with adults in their lives. So we have a scan coming out that's going to actually grade in 8 areas how we as a region are doing, and then we're going to position our grant making in sports and recreation around that scan and study. And most importantly, we're going to form 8 roundtables in this region to drive on those 8 points. So across 3 regions, that's 24 roundtables we're going to see managed to keep community engagement in that process.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. The scan, I just read it yesterday. We spent yesterday looking at about 6 or 7 different things that we think we're going to be able to sort of focus on this year. I'll just name 2 that have very long standing. The New Economy Initiative that everyone participates in is now in its 4th year of Any Ideas, just announced in the last couple of days, where we will again invest in existing businesses in the city of Detroit, Highland Park and Hamtramck. That is one of the most moving things we do every year, the excitement of being recognized. So I think that that's really a high priority. The other is that we have been doing the development of greenways for 17 years here and around the 7 counties, hundreds of miles. I think you're going to hear shortly a very exciting announcement here in Detroit.
So I think what I'm most proud of the work that the foundation has done has probably been the young leaders that are coming out of our work and who will and are currently leading our city. I don't know if Adriana Alvarez is still here. Stand up, Adriana. I hate to embarrass you, but I want you guys to see her because most of you are going to work for her one day. And there are, hundreds and thousands of young people that we've made investment in, or via the adults who made investments in them, and some directly, that I just think are going to be crucial to our city's recovery. And honestly, we got to figure out how to make sure more of those young people and those voices are in rooms like this, is what I would say. And then the second thing I would say, Marlo, in terms of platforms for people to get involved, there's a project called Grow Detroit's Young Talent. It costs you $2,000 to make an investment to make sure that a young person has a high-quality experience with employment while they're a teenager. We know the impacts of that work. It has grand impact on the trajectory of a child's life. So if you're a nonprofit, a for-profit, or retired and just generous, there are ways for you to make simple investments, and Ryan is there, and I'm sure he would even take checks today. But that's an easy way, I think, for all of us to make a contribution into young people that could be immediate and could happen this summer, literally months. Last thing I'd say about that is I don't know how many kids apply, but normally on the number of kids we hire, last year it was about 8,200 young people we hired, and I think we had maybe 15,000 kids apply. So there is a huge gap of young people who want to work, who want to do the right thing, who want to contribute to their families, who want to be contributors to our city. They have a platform, and all we have to do is to support them in that platform.
Thank you. Ryan, you'll take internships too, right, if offered?
Well, one thing I think we're particularly proud of sort of goes back to the conversation we had earlier, which is we are going to try to model how a philanthropic entity like Kresge can work in a neighborhood in sort of all of its dimensions. We're working up at Live 6. We've got to try to stabilize Mary Grove College. We're trying to create some new open space through something called Reimagining the Civic Commons. We're working with the mayor to try to stabilize the housing stock in Fitzgerald. We're investing in commercial corridors along the Live 6 and Avenue of Fashion district. Our sense is that you got to try to model some proof points. You got to sort of see, as I was saying earlier, how can you take some of the work that we've done downtown, some of the learning we've done downtown, and make sure it has even higher relevance for neighborhood residents. So Kresge and a lot of other folks are going to be joining forces with the mayor up in the Live 6 neighborhood. And I think how we do that and the mistakes we make and the successes we see will actually help us then move rapidly into other neighborhoods. Because the mayor is right. Every neighborhood in Detroit has a future. But we got to figure out some ideas about what works and where our intervention points can make a difference. I think in terms of what people can look to participate in, I think, and I actually don't mean this facetiously, I actually think Tanya and others in this community will figure out our K-12 set of issues. I think it's a combination of leadership and strategy and resources. But as they work on that, the work that we're trying to do with Hope Starts Here, which is a consortium of private, community, philanthropic, public sector actors trying to advance early childhood education, is just an open call for everybody and anybody to try to figure out how we can do better in making sure that kids arrive at the schoolhouse door ready to learn emotionally, intellectually, developmentally. I think there will be almost infinite possibilities for people to engage in that work, whether in their neighborhood, in their schools, or working with home providers. I think it's going to be a really powerful move, and I actually think, Marlo, it will signal to the rest of our country that we can do this in an equitable, inclusive, and comprehensive way, and I think it's going to make a big difference.
So when I think about what I'm excited about, we are waist deep in our strategic review process at Hudson Weber. We're not through that process, so I certainly don't want to get ahead of the board, but the question that started our panel today has been animating our conversations to really try to think how we get right around this issue of equity and inclusion, and how we infuse that in what we do as sort of we go out and support the work that's happening in Detroit. So I'm excited about those conversations. I feel enlightened by the exchange happening between me and board members that have been in this community for such a long time, and it just feels really good. So that's where we're at in terms of we haven't granted yet under a new grant plan because it's not developed yet. But I did have a chance a couple of weeks ago to be in D.C. and brag on some of the things happening in Detroit at a Department of Justice and LISC co-hosted conference. And what I talked about was a program we support through Jefferson East, which of course is a community development corporation that has been doing some really innovative public safety work. And the way in which I think it's innovative is that they've really set a table with multiple stakeholders to come. So not just law enforcement, obviously, community residents. They've got HUD at the table because they're working with housing developments and all the people that have a stake in what's happening in that particular community. And they're doing it in a way where everyone's voice is heard. It's a true co-production of public safety, and I think that's the future.
Thank you very much. Great question, Marlo. Let me just say in closing that it is very clear that as a city and region, we have an amazing, but as discussed today, imperfect momentum working for us. Not in my lifetime have I seen the alignment that we have now, and I think that alignment came out of us bottoming out, if you will, going into and coming out of bankruptcy, where you saw our municipal and civic leadership, the business community and philanthropy in lockstep, ensuring that we moved away from that time period. But there's still a lot more work to do. I think a lot of people, Marvis and others in the crowd, have talked about what needs to be done. And while the people on stage are doing an outstanding job, they cannot do it alone. And so What everyone here has to determine is how can you individually best contribute. Is that just in your community? Is that your block club? Politically, is it going to the polls and voting to ensure that we elect people that have the same mission in mind that we do? And is it stepping up and getting involved in one of the many nonprofit philanthropic organizations that exist, the vast majority of which are not represented on this stage and will not be in the news or on CNBC, but are doing phenomenal work in the community. So I'm leaving feeling very charged and encouraged. I hope everyone else is here too. Thank you for coming, and we are adjourned. I would ask the speakers to remain on stage for photographs. I called Dad last night. I was like, how much money did you give away?
It's amazing. I tell everybody tomorrow, your dad,
Yeah, I saw